So far, my sample app displays the text of the flower name using a list activity. And now I'd like to retrieve photos from the web and display those as well. I'll show you where the photos are on the service's website. In this version of the project, I've added a constant named photos base URL. I'll select and copy that URL to the clipboard, and then I'll view that URL in a browser. This directory on my web server contains graphics, and each graphic has a name that matches an element in the feed. So, for example, this JPG file matches up with one of the data items, one of the products or flowers. My goal is to download these images to the Android device and display them in my list using the image view widget that I've already placed in the detailed item view layout. So here are the steps that I'm going to follow. First of all, I need a place to store the graphics, to keep them in memory so I can get to them easily. And the best place to do that is in my plain old Java object, my flower class. So I'll start in that class. I'm going to declare a new private field, data typed as bitmap. The bitmap class is a member of the Android.graphics package. I'll make sure it's imported into my class, and I'll give this field a name of bitmap. Then I'll use a quick fix for this new field and create a getter and setter. And I'll place the getter and setter after the last method in the class. In this case, it's setPhoto. That adds the new code at the bottom. I have a getBitmap and a setBitmap method. And that's all I need to do in the plain old Java object class. Now the next step is to loop through the data that I've already retrieved, which is now a list of flower objects, and retrieve each photo in turn. To make this a little bit easier, I've refactored this class a little bit. You might remember that my async task declaration, which is on line 84 of this file, has 3 generic declarations, and they used to be 3 strings. The first generic declaration is for the input type, the second is for the progress information, and the third is the return data type. And that's what I've changed. Now my async task, instead of returning a string, returns a list of flower objects. And in my doInBackground method, I've moved the code that parses the JSON feed so that it's happening in the background, as part of the background thread. Now, by the time the doInBackground method is complete, my data has already been parsed and is ready to use. And here's what's happening so far. When I get the data, I'm retrieving and displaying just the names of the flowers. And now I'll add the code that displays the images. I'm going to add some code right here, after I've retrieved the feed and parsed it, but before I return the list of flowers. And I'm adding the new code here in the background thread because I'm now going to execute a whole bunch of new network requests, one for each image. I'll use a for each code template, and I'm going to loop through the list of flowers. So I'll change the data type to flower, the name of the object I'm iterating on to flower, and the list that I'm looping through to flower list. Next, I'm going to request the photo for each flower. This might generate an exception, so I'll add a try-catch block. Here's the code within the try block. First, I need to construct the URL where the photo can be retrieved. Going back up to the top of the file, I have this constant that I declared, photos base URL. So I'll create a new string here within the try block that I'll name image URL. I'll start it with that new constant, photos base URL, and then I'll append to that the value of the photo field of the flower object, using the code flower.getPhoto. Now I have a complete URL pointing to the photo I want. Next, I'll create an input stream object. This is a member of java.io, and I'll name it in. And I'll get its value by creating a new URL object, and that's a member of java.net. I'll pass in image URL, that's the location of the specific photo I want, and then from the URL object, I'll call a method called getContent. That retrieves the entire content of that location in one request. It comes back as a blob of data, and I can then access it through the input stream. I need to add some casting to this expression, so I'll use a quick fix and add cast to input stream. So now I have my input stream and I'm ready to get the bitmap. I'll declare a bitmap object, and once again that's a member of android.graphics. I'll name it bitmap, all lowercase, and I'll get that value by calling a class called bitmapFactory and a method of that class called decodeStream. And I'll pass in the input stream, which is named in. That line of code will take the stream, decode it, and turn it into an Android bitmap object. Now I'm ready to save the bitmap. I'll use that new setBitmap method that I just created, and I'll pass in the bitmap object. And that bitmap object is now a part of my plain old Java object, my flower. And finally, I'll close the input stream with in.close. If you prefer, you can move that code into a finally block. In the catch block, I'll just print out a stack trace. And so now I'm getting the data from the JSON feed and then immediately looping through the feed and retrieving each of the images in turn and saving them in my list. Those bitmaps will now be available when I go to display the list of data. And that display operation is handled in the adapter, the flower adapter class. So I've added a comment down here, display the flower photo in the image view widget, and that will take 2 lines of code. I'll create an image view reference. I'll type the name of the class and press Control Space to import it, and I'll name this image. And then I'll call view.findViewById and pass in r.id.imageView1. And be sure to cast the result as ImageView. Then I'll call a method of the ImageView object called setImageBitmap with image.setImageBitmap. And notice there are a lot of ways to set an image. I'm choosing this one. And I'll pass in flower.getBitmap. And that retrieves the bitmap object that I had previously saved in my list of flowers. I'll save that change, and now I'm ready to test. I'll run the app in the emulator, and notice that when I click the Get Data menu item, it's going to take a lot longer to get the results, because now I'm not just making an HTTP request for the JSON feed, I'm downloading all of the images. How long this takes to execute will depend on your network connection and, if you're working on a physical device, on the capabilities of that device. But if everything works correctly, you should see this result. You should see all the flowers, and for each flower you should see the name and the associated image. And because you're working in a list activity, you should be able to cleanly scroll up and down and see all of the data. So that's one approach to working with binary resources, retrieving them all in the same asynchronous task in which you've retrieved the original feed. In some applications, and with a small amount of binary resources, that should be fine. But for other apps, you might want to delay the acquisition of binary resources, such as images, to a later moment. And I'll show you a strategy for that in the next movie.